Hello everyone, this is Erik, the Asian movie enthusiast, and welcome to part 4 of my Takashi Miike filmography review. I personally enjoyed all 8 films that I will be covering tonight, to a greater or lesser extent. But with that said, I'm definitely going to help you prioritize which movies are really worth seeking out, compared to some of the other lesser titles that could still serve as adequate time wasters on a lonely, rainy night. And remember, all of the movies that I discuss will be listed in the description box below, and we continue with our excursion through 1999. Now, I mentioned in my last video that it was a very busy year for this director, because 7 of his films were released in 1999 alone. And we already covered 2 of those movies in the last video. Those were Ley Lines and Silver. The first being a pretty good movie, the second being not so good. And it's time to finish off the remaining 5 from 1999 and then move on to subsequent years. Now, our first film this evening is probably the most popular title in Miike's entire filmography, and it's arguably his best movie. I am, of course, talking about Audition from 1999. This is a horror film. Now, I already reviewed this film in my Asian Horror Year in Review playlist from 1999, but I'll summarize my review here as well for your convenience. Now, this begins with a widower who holds a staged movie audition in order to meet girls. He has a teenage son who is pushing him to move on and get remarried, and the father's friend is a lower-level producer who sets the audition up. Unfortunately for him, his choice of woman is not so wise. Now, the major thing to point out with Audition is that there are some really creepy scenes that result from Miike's talent at slowly overturning lurking dangers. The eeriness slowly builds throughout the runtime. There's also some surrealistic and dreamy imagery here that is quite unnerving. Performances are top-notch, basically across the board. The psychological merits of this film are significant. We'll get to that in a few minutes. And the final 20 minutes are sufficiently harrowing. Viewers who are unaware really should be warned that this film does include some graphic violence to it. Now, the objectification of women is a big theme in this film, but it's more nuanced than you might think, because you do genuinely like the lead character, who, seems like a decent guy. It's just that some of his perspectives and thoughts are a bit flawed. Like, for example, taking the position that choosing women is kind of like choosing cars in a parking lot. But I appreciated that they didn't make our protagonist an outright sleazeball, who's trying to just bed a bunch of women. I'm sure they're saving that angle for the American remake, which I'm still amazed hasn't happened yet. But Audition definitely gets its due as a film. It has received a lot of acclaim from both critics and casual horror fans alike. But every once in a while, I'll see one particularly ridiculous claim that Miike intentionally wanted Audition to be boring for most of the runtime, just so he could shock us out of our seats later on. Now, I'm wondering, is there like an interview somewhere online where Miike actually admitted to this? And is this the same interview where he said that One Missed Call was his first commercial film? I'm kind of wondering where people get this stuff, because I'm not seeing it. Now, if you thought Audition was boring, then, that's fine, but I seriously doubt that was Miike's intention here. And actually, I think there's a lot of interesting stuff during the first half of this film. I mean, the entire audition process is actually very amusing, and there's even some effective comedy that's tossed in. In addition, some of the exchanges of dialogue, if you remember, are actually replayed with different wording, which is kind of a, thought-provoking experience, because you think to yourself, which conversation was real? Did our protagonist only hear what he wanted to hear while courting this woman? Stuff like that. There's a lot of good stuff in this, a lot of subtle stuff, and just good content here to mine out of it. So I don't buy the whole Miike intentionally wanted to bore us during the first hour of this film claim that I occasionally hear. Now, I did come across an incredible fact regarding this film that I did not know before. This film was shot in under 20 days. So the entire production period was like 19 days or something, which is it's ridiculous and impressive, given what came out of this. It reminds me of Marebito from Shimitsu, who filmed that film in like 8 days, and I cover that in my Asian horror playlist. Just incredible stuff that some filmmakers can do in such a short period of time. Shinya Tsukamoto has also had some really tight windows to operate, so yeah, I thought that was really incredible. Nice fact. And, Audition may be an obvious recommendation, but it needs to be made. It's a must-see film. Availability on Audition is expectedly widely available. Alright, our next film tonight is another fairly popular title in this director's filmography, and that is Dead or Alive. This is kind of a crime action drama. So without a home and feeling no obligation to Japanese society or Yakuza, Ryuichi, played by Riki Takuchi, and his small group decide to make their own place by trying to take over the Shinjuku underworld and the drug trade from China. So as they plan an all-out assault on the remaining Chinese and Japanese mafia kings, only Detective Jojima, played by Sho Aikawa, stands between them and complete domination. Now, Dead or Alive is one part of a trilogy. It's more of a thematic trilogy, which includes Dead or Alive 2 from 2000 and Dead or Alive Final from 2002. All three of these films have the same two lead actors, but are not connected by an overarching story, so you can watch them in any order. Now, this movie, the first Dead or Alive, immediately makes an impression. The first 10 minutes of this film is an absolute classic. Definitely one of the craziest montages you'll see. At one point, for example, a clown pole dances at a strip club. And that's only one of many hilarious images here. Very, very funny stuff, and it won't be the last time that you see a crazy montage from Miike. In fact, it's one of his defining qualities as a filmmaker. And I'll point a few more out as we go through his movie list. Now, the viewer is going to ride the high of that energetic opening for a while here. Okay, but the middle section is rather meandering and slow-paced, even a bit dull. To its credit, it does establish a convincing conflict between the cops and criminals, but I felt like it could have been portrayed in a more interesting manner during the middle section. So that's kind of the big problem I had with this movie, is that middle half hour. The final 30 minutes, though, are basically superb. Kicks into high gear with an impressive shootout in a club, and then eventually leads to a memorable finale that's full of surprises. As one might expect, Dead or Alive is an oddball film that is certainly a bit different from the typical gangster flick. It's mostly pretty serious. It does take itself seriously for the most part. It's gritty, it's got a little sleaziness to it, it's perverted at certain moments. For example, there's a pretty disgusting, humiliating murder scene near the midpoint that's kind of hard to sit through. But there are also parts of this movie that are genuinely crowd-pleasing and fun. Huge tonal shifts in this one, making an interesting watch. Now, Riki Takuchi does have a history of overacting at times, but he gives a legitimately good performance in this, I thought, as does Sho Aikawa. In fact, everyone contributes to some good acting in this. One other thing I noticed is that there are some nice shots of Japanese urban areas as well as nearby shorelines, and also showcases twice one of the weirdest cemeteries I've ever seen. If you've seen the film, you might know what I'm talking about. So look out for that if you haven't. So I definitely recommend Dead or Alive, despite some of its pacing issues. A lot of people like this movie even more than I do, which means that you should definitely check it out. However, it is not my favorite installment of this trilogy. Dead or Alive 2 is my personal favorite, and we will be reviewing that in my next video in this playlist. And I also plan on reviewing Dead or Alive Final in the next video as well, so look out for those. Now, availability of this, fortunately, is that it is widely available. Alright, our next three films tonight are merely watchable. These are like the lower grade films we're covering tonight. In my opinion. And they do represent lower priority titles. Most people likely will not even want or bother to seek these out, but I did find them to be decent enough for a lazy night's viewing. The first one tonight is called White Collar Worker Kintaro from 1999. This is a drama action film. Now, Kintaro, a former mob boss, has put his wild past behind him and is now an honest white-collar worker at a construction company determined to stay on the straight and narrow. But when a powerful corporation becomes bent on the destruction of his employer and enlists corrupt politicians and underworld muscle to aid them in bringing down the small company, Kintaro realizes his street smarts may not be enough. Soon, the local Yakuza mob branch gets involved, and Kintaro is eventually forced to contact his old biker buddies to help him settle the score. Yeah, this movie is pretty cheesy. It's pretty cheesy. The protagonist is very simplistic, but kind of likable. He's got a manic, positive energy about him that kind of grew on me throughout the film. The conflicts, they're moderately engaging. For example, some of the construction bidding scenes are kind of amusing because the bad guys win the bids against almost insurmountable odds, meaning that there was some kind of backdoor dealings going on. There are also a few fist fights and tough guy moments to enjoy. However, this flick has its fair share of problems here, okay? The resolution to the conflict near the end of the film is rather contrived and unconvincing. I was hoping for something more exciting or memorable, you know what I mean? Direction is competent, but surprisingly vanilla and lacking in style. You know, we got Miike here at the helm. Doesn't really show any of his stylistic flourishes. It's quite a contrast with something like Dead or Alive, which we just covered. Script writing is also fairly obvious and shallow in terms of content, so there's not much depth here. Now, White Collar Worker Kintaro is a mainstream effort that is not particularly successful at being like a juggernaut of pure entertainment value, but it does offer a decent night of brainless entertainment. If you go into this expecting like a shallow affair, you may find it watchable. This has the feel of a completely inoffensive family film, actually, and is yet another piece of the growing line of evidence that suggests that One Missed Call from 2003 was not Miike's first mainstream project, as I've said plenty of times so far. And remember, we already covered Andromeda back in 1998, so yes, this director made some mainstream stuff before 2003. Now, in terms of availability on White Collar Worker Kintaro, it is moderately available on DVD. All right, our next two films are kind of related, and they are very obscure. The first one is called Tennen Shojo Mann, also known as Man, a Natural Girl. 1999 still. This is a genre bender, action, drama, comedy stuff here. This is a 3-episode television production that is structured as one big movie. Our heroine here is a conveyor belt sushi-eating chick who watches professional wrestling and helps little kids by punching vending machines that eat their money. She's immediately approached by a modeling agency but shows no interest. You see, she's got martial arts abilities and will not be objectified. Now, through a brief flashback, it's communicated that the first lucky souls to feel her wrath were some little brat bullies who were promptly beaten by her cute little fists. Nowadays, she continues to beat people up who deserve it, like perverts, evil schoolgirls, and other bad guys. So during the opening half hour, it will be apparent that some of this film was shot in the streets while people were walking around. And no, I'm not talking about extras, but instead actual people who just so happened to be in Miike's frame while shooting the movie. Yes, this is very cheap, cheesy production here that still has a bit of panache to it. Miike uses some interesting camera angles at times, and some tricks to liven things up. He also tosses in some funny introduction segments into each section of the film, where one of the characters speaks directly to the viewer. Also, there's a lot of location shots of Tokyo in this, which I liked. Now, in terms of the action itself, fights consist of basic karate, but it's still amusing to watch cute schoolgirls kick butt sometimes, you know. The second section of the film has a fight scene that was actually shot in a single take, unedited take, which is always nice to see. You know, they put some effort into it. It's not a really long sequence or anything. It's kind of short, but they executed it fairly well. There are some stretches with minimal action, though, so don't go in expecting like a high-octane extravaganza or anything here. Another positive I noticed was that the lead actress is quite charming, actually. She did a good job for such a low-budget affair. I will say, though, that the 3.5-hour runtime is on the long side here, so there are some slow patches here and there. Other negatives are what you would expect from a production like this, some spotty acting by the supporting actors, fairly weak story, etc. But I found it enjoyable as kind of a low-grade TV project. If you decide to seek it out, make sure you go in with the right expectations. And hard to find this one with subtitles, unfortunately. I think when I saw it, it was without subtitles. And the availability on this is not good. It's difficult to find. The related film, as you might expect given the title, is the companion piece of the film we just covered. However, it incorporates a different kind of antagonist, as you'll see. And this one is called Tennen Shojo Mann Next, also known as N Girls vs. Vampire. Still in '99. This is, again, a genre bender. You got drama, action, and horror. Now, this is a 2-episode television production that is structured as one big movie. It concerns the same butt-kicking schoolgirl from the predecessor, but a different actress is cast in the lead role here. It begins with, what else? Our protagonist kicking some butt. Meanwhile, a vampire takes his victim on a rooftop. So as it turns out, this vamp dude runs a modeling agency where he chooses average-looking girls and makes them beautiful through the process of vampirism. Our protagonist and her friends must confront these baddies to prevent their friends from becoming the next victims. Now, these vampires do have fangs, they do, and they also suck blood. But this movie mostly avoids the traditional elements of the vampire mythos because it disregards sunlight and wooden stakes in favor of karate, power bracelets, and piano music. Needless to say, there are some funny moments in this film. I like the girls' training of the grammar school boy in martial arts. They have like a little montage or 1 or 2 montages that I thought were pretty funny. And no one can keep a straight face while watching schoolgirls backflip and drop kick vampire hooligans everywhere. So that's good. Like its predecessor, we have a very low budget production, but Miike infuses a splash of style to help it out, as he sometimes does. I like the use of artificial color in this, which we will see in the next film I'm covering. It gives us some interesting visuals, and mix it up a little bit. For example, most of the blood in this movie is portrayed as like a neon pink color, which I've never seen before. So that was pretty interesting in terms of style. Protagonists, generally likable, but I like the lead actress from the first Tennen Shojo Mann film more than the lead actress in Tennen Shojo Mann Next. The actress from the first film gave a better overall performance and had a certain charm to her. The girl in this one was a little stiff. Now this one has a 160-minute runtime, so the story does drag out a bit. There's some shallow teen drama in here that kind of weighs it down. But again, it's worth a look for rabid fans of zero-budget schoolgirl vampire flicks, if you're a fan of those things. Availability, just like its predecessor, difficult to find. I think I saw both of these years ago on Daily Motion, the website. I checked recently and couldn't find them, so they probably got taken down. But it's not really. All 3 of those films, White Collar Worker Kintaro and the 2 Tennen Shojo films, if you don't see them, it's not a big deal. Alright, our next one here is one that I like quite a bit, I gotta say. So we've successfully completed Miike's film list from 1999, unbelievably. It's time to move on to the new millennium here, okay? And we also get to climb back up in terms of overall quality in terms of his films to one of the more interesting projects in Miike's filmography. I have not rewatched this in ages, and I'm really looking forward to another viewing because I enjoyed it a lot back in the day, and I saw it twice back in the day. And what I'm talking about is MPD Psycho from 2000. This is a thriller mystery. Now, I already reviewed this film in my Asian Horror Year in Review playlist from 2000, but I'll cover it here as well for your convenience. It's a six-part miniseries with a total runtime of about 5 hours. And the intriguing plot goes something like this. The third personality of a schizophrenic detective escapes his body, possesses others, and sets in motion a series of murders and dismemberments throughout a city. Now, complicating matters is a terrorist organization that dates back to the 1960s and has ties to a mysterious genetic research program. So can our detective track down his murderous personality before the body count gets too high? So MPD Psycho is a very weird, quirky experience that incorporates personality transfer between people, wacky detectives, stolen fetuses, people killed and planted in soil, bar-coded eyeballs, and many other oddities to enjoy. Perhaps its greatest contribution, however, is that the storyline is essentially a brain teaser that gives clues to many events that occur off-screen. So luckily, this is very sharply intelligent, I think, and successfully executes such things to really make sense in the long run after the viewer works things out. As things start going in the first few episodes, you're like, man, I'm confused. But if you rewatch the series, you pick up little things and you have to connect the dots, you know what I mean, to make the whole picture come into play here. It takes effort to track everything in these little short films, I guess you could call them, even though it's a mini-series, and figure everything out. So much so that I actually took notes when I watched it the second time, because the first time I saw this, I was like, wow, that was a lot of fun to watch, but does it really make sense? And I went the second time and I really tried to figure it out, and I think it does. I think it makes sense, so that's good. I would say that if you don't like puzzle-solving films that make you think, MPD Psycho may kind of rub you the wrong way because you may get lost in the details in terms of the story and the character relationships. But if you enjoy this brain-teasing style of filmmaking, man, there's much to enjoy in this. In addition, the character of Nishizono Shinji is perhaps one of the most intriguing murderers I have ever seen in a film or TV series, especially in terms of his personality and motives. Very interesting guy. He's kind of a wild card. Now, visually speaking, the special effects are cheap, but they are oddly pleasing to the eyes. This could be due to the weirdness of everything. But the unrealistic special effects only add to the unreal feel of the world that Miike created. Really odd. You know how I mentioned that pink neon blood in the last film we covered? Well, this one, again, some real vibrant, odd color palettes are used. And they're obviously artificial, but I don't know, it was kind of cool in this. Now, MPD Psycho definitely has a darker side to it at times. It's got that dark thriller vibe, along with the wacky humor. There are a few, excuse me, there are a few pixelated images of gore, which could annoy some people, but I actually found the use of pixelation in this case to be oddly unnerving. I think it works in this. And there's not a version floating out without the pixelation. Apparently, that's how either Miike or whoever decided to really make the final cut of the film. Now, on the negative side, there is a noticeable lack of action and suspense sequences, which would have added more excitement. You know what I mean? I really thought that this series was, if they had a little bit more of a budget and put together a few suspense sequences to add to like the slow burn thrills, it could have been phenomenal. But this series is very interesting for its massive quantities of creativity, as well as its seemingly endless layers of complexity. This is a very rewatchable series. Very thought-provoking stuff for sure. Now, MPD Psycho is widely available on DVD, so that's good. Now, our final two films tonight have flown under many people's radars, actually. But I think that both of them are legitimately entertaining and very impressive films. Now, the first one here is called The City of Lost Souls. Again, we're in 2000. This is an action drama. So a man of Japanese-Brazilian descent and his Chinese girlfriend are trying to leave Japan before she gets deported. But the head of a local Chinese crime syndicate has his eye on the girl. So the couple embarks on a colorful and nightmarish adventure as they try to collect the money they need to leave the country. First by stealing it, and then by selling drugs to get some of the additional cash, which results in conflicts with the Yakuza, obviously. Now, this begins with an action-packed opening, then quickly establishes the many characters and conflicts in a rather frenetic manner. Yet again, Miike explores individuals who seemingly have like nowhere to go and no allegiances to speak of, and we've seen this multiple times already. In this case, it's characters with mixed heritage or non-Japanese roots who are attempting to survive in or escape the city. Now, consequently, this film is loaded with cultural variety, and Miike certainly uses that to establish some good dialogue and interaction along the way. Now, this film is crazy, quirky, and unpredictable in spots. There are some great moments to be found here. There's like a transport bus breakout, there's a cockfight, a ping pong duel, and a shotgun shootout, which I found to be the most notable examples here. The violence avoids any excessive graphic moments, but it does get a bit bloody at times. Now the pacing, again with some Miike films, it does slow down during the middle section, which is one thing I noticed when I watched it a second time. Nothing major, though. It's not quite as debilitating as the first Dead or Alive film, which was still a good movie. I actually preferred this film a little bit more than the first Dead or Alive film, if I had to rank them. I didn't think the pacing was as much of an issue for The City of Lost Souls, but it's probably my biggest criticism of it. Regardless, though, this film is a good quality, fun movie that is another solid entry in this director's filmography that, may speak to those critics who dislike some of his more popular stuff. Something definitely to seek out here. Now, City of Lost Souls is widely available on DVD. It's kind of surprising, because not that many people talk about this one. The next film is even more obscure, and that film is called The Guys from Paradise. Again, we're stuck in the year 2000. This is a crime drama. Now, this one's real quite interesting. It follows the misadventures of a timid Japanese businessman who is imprisoned in the Philippines for smuggling heroin. Even worse for him, his corrupt colleagues are putting pressure on him to reveal the whereabouts of a large stash of cash that they need for dubious means. Now, within the prison, he befriends a handful of other Japanese inmates who are there, one of which is a gangster who killed some people and chose to become a prisoner for the purpose of hiding from his enemies. There's also a women's section of the prison grounds where an attractive lady is serving time for embezzling huge amounts of money from a company. Now, I can almost guarantee that some viewers will be confused with the opening 10 minutes of this film. So I'm going to clear that up. I'm going to clear up that confusion just in case you watch the film or want to watch it, because there's something that makes The Guys from Paradise such a unique film. The prison structure is very odd here, okay? It's basically an outdoor neighborhood of sorts. You do occasionally see traditional prison walls, but it's really hard to grasp the layout of the prison grounds in your head because most of the time it feels like the characters are walking around in a Filipino suburb. Even more confusing is that certain inmates, mostly Yakuza, are allowed to travel outside of the prison grounds for business. So it definitely creates a very unique prison film, so to speak, with lots of interaction between the inmates that take place in unconventional environments. Still, it's not like this prison is a desirable place to be. It's pretty filthy. And, for example, our protagonist can't even find a clean toilet to use for a while. Prisoners have to wait for a rainstorm in order to bathe, so, it's not exactly a posh environment. Now, I already think I gave you an idea of the possible conflicts that will arise in the plot synopsis, but there are some themes to consider here. Like the criticism of Japan as the greedy economic leader of Asia. That's kind of referenced a few times. There's also a properly developed character arc of our protagonist that, is slowly revealed throughout. Events in the outside world kind of end up changing his perspective over his current situation within the prison, which I thought was interesting. There's some good dramatic depth to this film, I think. There are a few random observations I've made while watching this one. It's a deliberately paced movie, but there is a fun chase scene near the midpoint and a few minor scuffles down the stretch. Now, I'm personally unfamiliar with the lead actor in this film, but there are a few recognizable faces in this. Kenichi Endo, who of course has appeared in many Miike films, and you'll recognize him if you see him here, and Tsutomu Yamazaki, who has appeared in films such as Tampopo. Now, The Guys from Paradise is set during the hot months of the year, so it has a very summer-type feel. This is like a summer film. And we get to see some lower-income areas from within the Philippines as well, which has some interesting visuals and cultural significance. So, there's a little bit of violence and sexual content, nothing crazy. However, I will say that I was kind of put off by 2 scenes involving human fluids, but I'll leave it at that. I'm not sure those were necessary, but they're short scenes, and it's not a big deal. But overall, The Guys from Paradise is actually a surprisingly good film that could be considered a companion piece to The Bird People in China, just in terms of its overall style. So if you're a fan of that film, check this one out if you could get your hands on it. Now, the availability of The Guys from Paradise, it's available on YouTube without subtitles. It's available on Region 2 DVD without subtitles. So you have to wait until it pops up again on YouTube or a streaming site with subs. I think you probably need subs for this one. Alright, so that wraps up part 4 of this playlist. Big must-see is Audition, to no one's surprise. But there are 4 other titles that we covered that I would say are strong recommendations. If you want to sufficiently explore this director's better films, I think you got to seek out The City of Lost Souls, The Guys from Paradise, Dead or Alive. And then I would say that MPD Psycho, in my opinion, is actually more purely entertaining than those films I just mentioned, with the exception of Audition. But I definitely recommend that one as well. If you want to go for something a little bit longer in runtime, it's like 5 hours long, and if you're in the mood for something weird, check out MPD Psycho. I think it's really good and kind of underappreciated. And be sure to join me for part 5 of my Takashi Miike filmography review, which will be more of like a hit or miss affair. I have a few controversial opinions regarding one of the more highly acclaimed films in my next video, and there are a few lame titles to slug through again as well. But there are 3 higher quality films that I will be recommending, so make sure you check that out. And as always, I will see you next time.